Hi, my name is Andrea Sommese and I'm a postdoc here at the ELTE University of Budapest. I work on a world learning project led by Professor Adam Miklosi and Dr. Claudia Fugazza. I'm going to talk about our exploratory analysis of head tilting in dogs. But first, let me give you a little bit of context here. It is well documented and well known that in many species, mostly vertebrates, there is a side preference for processing sensory information. For instance, in chicks, it has been found that they prefer and they turn their bodies and heads towards one side over the other when they're looking to certain stimuli. This preference in using one eye over the other has also been found in other species, such as horses, but also toads. And these asymmetries in the behavior, in the way that animals perceive sensory information, it has been found not only when it comes to visual cues, but also auditory stimulus. So some animals tend to prefer to use one ear over the other when they're listening, for instance, to conspecific calls. It happens in sea lions, in some monkeys, in mangabe, but also other species. And of course, also when animals are sniffing, they tend to prefer one nostril over the other. All these asymmetries in the behavior manifests also in other two species, the human species of course, but also in dogs. This behavioral asymmetry is actually a reflection of a brain lateralization in the dog's brain. This lateralization has been found for the first time in 2014 by the group led by Attila Andex. One of the ways brain lateralization manifests in dogs is the way that they process auditory stimuli. For instance, dogs tend to turn their heads toward the right when they're processing meaningless information, which entails an involvement of the left hemisphere, and instead they turn their head to the right with left hemisphere involvement when they're processing something meaningful like a command or praise words. There are many other ways in which dogs manifest this lateralization. So they can prefer one eye over the other when they're looking at something. They can prefer one nostril over the other when they're sniffing at something. Of course, the way they wag their tail is also influenced by the lateralization, and also paw preference. So for instance, when something falls under the couch and they try to retrieve it with a specific paw. Another way this lateralization manifests is when dogs are tilting their heads. Here you can see Amy tilting her head when she's listening to her owner talking to her. There have been no explanations so far about why dogs tilt their heads, just some suggestions. So for this study we observed the behavior of two different categories of dogs, gifted dogs and typical dogs. In this previous experiment, we wanted to see if dogs were able to learn the names of two toys, and we actually found out that this ability is not something that all dogs share, but only a few talented individuals are able to do. So for this experiment, we had a very simple setup. The dog was together with the owner and the experimenter in one room, and then there were a bunch of toys scattered in the other room. And the dog was supposed to fetch reliably and consistently a specific toy upon owner request. So here you can see Max. He's an Hungarian gifted dog, and the owner is gonna ask him to retrieve Sebastian, a plastic crab, and Max will listen and then will run to the other room and get the correct toy. Max also performed a very nice head tilt here. For this study, we had two groups of dogs. On one side, we had 6 gifted word learner dogs. They were all border collies. And then we had 34 typical dogs. Half of them were border collies and half of them were belonging to other breeds. Actually, within the typical border collies, we had one special individual, and we found out very quickly that she was not a typical dog, but a gifted word learner dog. And I'm going to talk about her a little bit later. For this study, we observed the behavior of the dogs during 3 experiments. The first two actually are part of the word learning experiment that I showed you before, that I mentioned before, and the last one instead took the name of Genius Dog Challenge. And only gifted dogs participated in it. So now I will show you how we were collecting data. So just remember the setup we had. The dogs were in one room with the owner and the toys were scattered in the other room. So here you will see the owner asking for a specific toy.
Húzit kérem, menjél hozzá, húzit! Főtárs, húzit kérem!
You can see that here with the typical dog we didn't have any head tilts.
Dai, cadê a Margarida? Vai, pega a Margarida!
Instead, you just saw Gaia. She's also a gifted dog, she's from Brazil, and she was performing a very, very nice head tilt to the left when the owner was asking her for a toy. So we were noting the frequency of this behavior, but also the side towards which this tilt occurred. Just showing you now our results very, very quickly. We found out that in this context, so when the owner was asking to retrieve a specific toy upon its name, typical dogs almost never tilted their heads, while gifted dogs did it very often, basically every other trial. Another important result here is that gifted dogs always tilted their head towards the same side. So a left tilter kept consistent over the course of few months or even a year. So just to summarize it here, you can see that Gaia was always tilting her head to the left, such as Whiskey, a gifted dog from Norway. Then Max was always tilting his head towards the right, just as Nalani, a gifted dog from the Netherlands. Then we had Rico and Oliva. They were tilting their heads mostly towards the left, but actually they were also tilting towards the right. And then we have Squall, a gifted dog from the US, and he never tilted his head in any of our experiments. So just to summarize our findings, typical dogs in this context where the owner was asking for a specific toy almost never tilted their heads, while gifted dogs did it very often. There was no owner effect, so it didn't matter where the owner was positioned. It didn't matter if the owner was on the right or the left or right in front of the dog, but as I mentioned before, the side of the tilt was consistent, even after a few months or a year. One more thing that I want to mention here is that most of the dogs you saw here were border collies. Our gifted dogs are not only border collies. Here you see Captain, he's a gifted dog from the US. And also head tilts are present and manifested in typical dogs, but not in this specific context. So if you want to know more about this research, you can find the article on animal cognition. It's an open access article, so it's free for everyone to access to. And if you want to know more about our gifted dogs or the Genius Dog Challenge, you can reach out on our Facebook, Instagram, webpage, or YouTube channel. Thank you.